There is a kind of silence that comes after the funeral. It is not respect. It is disorientation. You find yourself alone in a house that no longer works the same way, with paperwork you do not understand, with people who have too many opinions, and with a question no one asks you out loud, but that follows you everywhere. And now, what do I do with my life, with my decisions, with everything I sign, when I'm still not fully awake inside? Maybe you are going through that right now, or maybe you're afraid you will someday. Because when one partner dies before the other, the world does not stop. On the contrary, it speeds up. They ask you for answers, signatures, permissions, moves, changes. And in the middle of the shock, saying yes feels easier than thinking. But what happens when that yes costs you years of dignity, autonomy, and peace? Who warns you about the mistakes that make no noise at first, but come after you later? My name is Gabriel, and this is the Stoic Garden. Today, I am going to walk with you calmly through 9 silent mistakes many people make when their partner passes away before them. Not from theory, but from lived experience. From what I learned too late and saw others learn too late. If you stay until the end, I am going to give you more than warnings. A closing that is almost never spoken, but that makes the difference between surviving this stage or losing yourself inside it. We are not going to rush here, we are going to think together. 1. Signing anything while in shock. The first days after your partner's death are not really days. They are a fog. The body walks, responds, nods, but the mind arrives late to everything. And in that state, the papers show up. Forms, authorizations, waivers, sales, powers of attorney. There is always someone who says it is urgent, that it is better to take advantage now, that later it will be more complicated. And you, exhausted with a worn-out voice and a heart that is still in another room, say yes because you do not have the strength to say anything else. I think about this carefully because I saw it up close. I saw men and women sign with a trembling hand things they did not fully understand, just so they could be left alone to sit in silence for a while. No one signs from freedom when they are in shock. You sign from exhaustion, from fear of making a mistake, from the need for someone else to take control for a moment. Do you realize that when they put a pen in your hand? I remember a friend, older than me, recently widowed. In the kitchen, her coffee cup was still there. He had not washed it, and that same day he signed a document that gave up an important part of an estate he did not even know existed. No one explicitly deceived him. No one forced him. They just rushed him. And rushing in those days is an elegant form of violence. The ancient Stoics spoke about not deciding while disturbed. Seneca said it simply, without ornament. A troubled mind cannot see proportions. Everything feels urgent, everything feels final. That is why the first practical tool here is almost offensively simple, yet it saves entire lives. No signing without sleeping, no signing without reading, no signing without being able to say out loud what you are accepting and what you are giving up. If you cannot explain it in your own words, it is not time yet. Maybe someone will be annoyed with you. Maybe they will say you are making things complicated. Let them. Other people's discomfort lasts a moment. Legal and financial consequences last for years. Ask yourself this before signing anything. If in 6 months, when the pain is more settled, you would still say yes with the same clarity. If the answer is not a calm yes, then today it is no. There is a scene that repeats more often than anyone admits. A cold office, a thick folder, a polite official who does not look you in the eyes. And you thinking about something else, about the absence, about the noise of the empty house. That is not the place or the moment to decide anything that cannot be undone. Because there are decisions that do not come back, even if the soul tries to. And the most dangerous part is that this first yes opens the door to all the others. When you give in here, you learn to give in. When you sign without being present, you begin to disappear from your own life. It is not a small mistake. It is the beginning of a chain. And we have not yet talked about who shows up next, offering help, management, and quick solutions. That is where the risk changes shape, but not substance. 2. Accepting help from others without verifying. After the first impact, something almost inevitable appears. People, some with good intentions, others not so much, and many mixing both without realizing it. They tell you they are going to help, that they will take care of things, that you should not worry, that you already have enough on your plate, and you, tired of thinking, feel grateful. You say yes, because delegating feels like rest. But at this stage, delegating without clarity is often the beginning of a silent loss of control. I have thought about this a lot because I myself came close to making that mistake. When everything feels heavy, any outstretched hand looks like salvation. The problem is that not all hands support, some direct. And when someone else starts managing your life without you fully understanding what they are doing, with which documents, with what authority, and in exchange for what, you are no longer resting. You are giving up sovereignty. Have you ever asked yourself who is really deciding when you say, "You handle it"? There is a very common scene in old age that almost no one names. A son, a nephew, or acquaintance sits across from you with a folder and speaks to you as if you no longer have the energy to understand. They use soothing words. They promise it is for your own good. And you nod, not because you agree, but because you do not want to argue. Because arguing is tiring. But every yes spoken to avoid conflict later turns into a much bigger conflict. Only by then you no longer have the strength. Marcus Aurelius spoke of control as something internal, but he was not naive. He knew the external world matters when it affects your real life. Money, assets, paperwork are not vanity. They are structure. And without structure, calm does not exist. That is why the practical tool here is uncomfortable but necessary. Ask questions. Ask everything. Who does what? With what authorization? Which documents support each action? How much it costs? And something even more important, whether you can see every step, even if you are not the one executing it. I met an older woman who let others handle everything for convenience. In a few months, she no longer knew how much money she had, which accounts were still open, or who was deciding her medical expenses. No one mistreated her. No one stole from her in a crude way. She was simply pushed to the margins. And when she wanted to regain control, they told her everything was already done, that it was not worth changing. That is the price of saying yes too early. Ask yourself this honestly. If tomorrow that person disappeared, would you know how to take back control of your life? If the answer is no, then it is not help. It is dependency in advance. Real help leaves a clear trail. It leaves paperwork, explanations, access. It does not erase you. It supports you while you are still yourself. This point is not about distrusting everyone. It is about not disappearing from your own story. Because when you accept help without verifying, you do not only lose money or decisions, you lose presence. And recovering presence later costs much more than enduring an uncomfortable conversation now. And we still have not talked about the mistake that is born from emptiness when pain pushes you to change houses, cities, or lives before you have put anything in order inside. That is where the risk takes another form. 3. Selling the house or moving on impulse. There is a moment after the loss when space itself begins to hurt. The house is no longer a refuge, it is an echo. Every room brings back something, every object feels out of place. Then the idea appears, almost like a reasonable temptation, leaving, changing the scenery, believing that by moving, the pain will stay behind. And in that deep exhaustion, saying yes to a quick sale or an improvised move feels like an escape. I think about this carefully because I asked myself that question many times. What do I do with this house now that we are one less? At first, it is not a practical question, it is an emotional one. And the problem appears when an emotional question is answered with an irreversible financial decision. Pain does not understand deeds or contracts. It gets in the moving truck with you and settles into the new place without asking permission. Have you asked yourself whether what you want to change is the space or the absence? I have seen older people sell their homes within a few months, pressured by family members or by their own restlessness. Then come the quiet regrets. The money gets spent, the new place does not take root, and the feeling of having lost the last solid base arrives late. The house was not just walls, it was memory, stability, a point of reference. And without that anchor, everything else becomes more fragile. Epictetus said that it is not things that disturb us, but the judgment we make about them. Here the judgment is usually this: if I leave, I will be better. But the truth is harsher. First, you put your life in order. Then you decide where to live. The practical tool here is simple and requires discipline. Do not sell or move during the first year unless there is real necessity. Give grief time to lower the volume and allow clear thinking. There is a very common scene in old age. A person alone, sitting in a house that is too big, staring at unopened boxes. They neither stayed completely nor truly left. They only dismantled themselves halfway. That happens when you act on impulse, when you fail to distinguish between emotional discomfort and real urgency, and confusing the two is costly. Ask yourself something before saying yes to a change like this. Whether this decision improves my stability in 5 years, not in 5 weeks. Because old age does not tolerate foundational mistakes. Every big decision should add calm, not just momentary relief from pain. Selling or moving before you have rebuilt a minimum inner routine is like changing ships in the middle of a storm. This mistake does not shout at first. It presents itself as relief, but over time, it turns into uprooting. And when you lose your place, you become more dependent on people, exactly at a stage when dignity needs structure, not improvisation. And the next mistake is born precisely from that, from the desire not to be a burden, to make yourself smaller so others feel comfortable. That is where another silent renunciation begins. 4. Giving up your rights so you don't complicate things. This mistake rarely comes from the outside. It is born within. It comes from an old idea, deeply rooted in those of us who have lived a long time. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to cause problems. Let them handle it. I will adapt. And so, almost without noticing, you begin to give up things that are not favors, but rights. An inheritance, an account, a medical decision, an asset that belongs to you, all under the excuse of keeping the peace. I have thought a lot about this because I have seen it repeat itself in men and women who were strong their entire lives. They worked, supported families, made difficult decisions. And when they reach old age after a loss, they shrink, as if asking for what is fair was selfish, as if defending what is yours were a lack of gratitude. At what point did you start believing that your place became negotiable? There is a quiet scene that repeats itself in many families. Everyone sitting around a table. They talk about distributions, paperwork, what is convenient. And you listen more than you speak. You nod more than you ask. You say yes so as not to tense the atmosphere. But that yes is not born of generosity, it is born of guilt. And guilt, when it rules, always ends in dependency. The Stoics spoke of dignity as something that cannot be delegated. You do not ask permission to be responsible for yourself. Defending what belongs to you is not an attack on anyone. It is maintaining order. The practical tool here is uncomfortable but clear. Separate affection from rights. You can love your family and at the same time insist that what is yours be respected. They are not opposites. Confusing them is what creates conflict later. I knew a man who gave everything up so there wouldn't be problems. A few years later, he was financially dependent on those he had benefited. There was no bad intention at the beginning. But when the balance breaks, the relationship also becomes distorted. You are no longer a father, a mother, or an adult. You become a burden, and that, even if it is never said out loud, is felt every day. Ask yourself this calmly. If you give something up today, what power are you handing over tomorrow? Because every right you surrender out of discomfort is a decision someone else will make for you later on. And old age is not sustained by compliance, it is sustained by respect. Respect begins when you stop apologizing to yourself for existing with full rights. This point does not close easily because it touches deep fibers, upbringing, guilt, fear of conflict. But if it is not corrected here, it drags through the rest of your life. And the next mistake is almost a direct consequence of this one. Leaving things open, accounts, debts, services, because you do not want to review them, because you do not want to inconvenience anyone. That is where disorder stops being emotional and becomes practical, and the price goes up again. 5. Keeping accounts, debts, or services in your name without reviewing them. After your partner's death, there is a kind of exhaustion that cannot be seen. It is not only emotional, it is mental. Thinking is harder. Deciding feels heavy. And then a dangerous phrase appears, almost always whispered. Let's leave everything as it is. I'll look at it later. That yes, seemingly harmless, turns over time into a silent drain of money, energy, and unnecessary problems. I have seen older people continue paying for services they no longer use, duplicate insurance policies, subscriptions no one remembers signing up for, loans that should have been closed long ago. Not out of ignorance, but out of exhaustion. Reviewing things means facing a new reality. It means accepting that life has changed, and many prefer to postpone that acceptance by overpaying every month. Have you ever asked yourself how much it cost you not to look? There is an everyday scene that repeats itself. A mailbox full of envelopes, an email inbox saturated with notices, a card that gets charged automatically. Everything keeps working as before, but your life is no longer the same. And that constant mismatch creates a sense of disorder that seeps into everything. Money is not just money, it is future peace of mind. And when you do not know exactly what comes in and what goes out, you lose your footing. Here the Stoics were uncompromising about order, not as obsession, but as the foundation of calm. External order to support internal order. The practical tool at this point allows no excuses. Take inventory, sit down, even if it is hard, and write everything down. Accounts, debts, services, taxes, cards, insurance, one by one. See which apply, which do not, which can be closed, transferred, or renegotiated. Not everything gets resolved in a day, but everything has to start being seen. I remember a woman who said she did not want to touch anything because it felt like a betrayal of the past, as if reviewing accounts meant erasing memories. Over time, she understood something hard, but freeing. Love does not live in the bills. It lives in memory and in the way you continue living. Financial disorder honors no one. It only weakens you. Ask yourself this honestly. If tomorrow you had to explain to someone how your finances work, could you do it without shame or confusion? If the answer is no, then it is not a minor issue. It is a signal, because old age demands clarity, not to accumulate, but to avoid dependence. This mistake rarely explodes all at once. It accumulates. And when it adds to emotional exhaustion, it makes you more vulnerable to an even greater risk. Isolating yourself, letting others decide for you because you are already tired of holding everything together. That is where comfort starts to look like rest. But in reality, it is abandonment. and that is something we need to talk about honestly in the next point. 6. Isolating yourself and delegating your life for convenience. There is a kind of exhaustion that does not go away with sleep. It is the fatigue of holding yourself together alone after having shared life for years. In that state, isolating yourself feels logical, not explaining, not going out, not deciding too much, and almost without noticing, you begin to delegate what is essential. Let someone else schedule the doctor's appointment. Let someone else manage the money. Let someone else decide the timetable. You say yes because it saves you energy, but that saving comes at a high cost. I say this out loud because pain makes you vulnerable, even if pride does not like to admit it. When you are like this, anyone who gets things done starts to take a central place, not because they are bad, but because you step back. And stepping back from your own life is never neutral. Every decision you do not make, someone else makes for you. Have you asked yourself how many important things you no longer decide simply to avoid having to think? There is a very real scene in old age. An older adult sitting in the living room while others talk about their routine as if they were not present. Schedules, meals, doctors, expenses. Everything is decided around them, not with them. There was no betrayal. There was a slow surrender, first out of pain, later out of convenience. And when they want to have a say again, they are no longer taken into account. Prolonged silence is interpreted as consent. The Stoics were very clear about this. Personal responsibility is not suspended by suffering. It adapts, but it is not handed over. Marcus Aurelius wrote to remind himself that no one can live for another. The practical tool here is minimal, but powerful. Maintain sovereignty in 3 non-negotiable areas: your basic daily routine, your key financial decisions, and your health. You do not have to do everything, but you do have to be present in what matters. I remember a man who said he felt at ease because his children took care of everything. Over time, he no longer knew what day his pension was paid or which doctor treated him. One day he wanted to change something simple and could not. Not because he was wrong, but because he no longer had a place. The initial convenience had turned into a cage. Ask yourself something gently, but without lying to yourself. If tomorrow you needed to make an important decision, are you in a position to do so, or do you depend on others to authorize it, explain it, or allow it? The difference between support and replacement is subtle but decisive. Support strengthens you. Replacement dims you. This mistake does not feel like a fall. It feels like rest. That is why it is so dangerous. Because when you realize it, you are already living halfway. And from there, it is easy to make another, even quieter mistake. Turning memory into an altar. Freezing the present so you do not feel guilty for still being alive. That one is not signed, but it is paid for every day. 7. Turning memory into an altar and freezing your present. This mistake does not arrive with paperwork or people around you. It arrives quietly. One day you decide not to move anything. You leave the clothes in the closet, the objects in their place, the routine suspended. Not because you thought it through, but because touching something hurts. And then, without saying it out loud, you begin to live as if your life were already closed. You keep breathing, but you do not move forward. You say yes to staying stuck. I have thought a lot about this because it is one of the most deceptive yeses. No one proposes it to you. No one demands it. You impose it on yourself, believing that this is how you honor the love you lived. But love does not ask for freezing. It asks for truth. And the truth is that time keeps moving, even if you do not want to look at it. Have you asked yourself whether what you call respect has not turned into fear of continuing to live? The scene is familiar. A house turned into a museum. Photos untouched, objects untouchable, habits that no longer serve any purpose. You do not go out. You do not invite anyone over. You do not reorganize your day. Everything revolves around what was, and without realizing it, the past takes up so much space that the present cannot enter. It is not fidelity. It is surrender, and surrender, even when disguised as love, ends up emptying you. The Stoics spoke of accepting reality as it is, not as we wish it would remain. Marcus Aurelius said it without softening it. What was, what is, and your duty is to inhabit the now with integrity. The practical tool here is not forgetting, but ordering. Keep what is essential, what truly represents the bond, and let go of the rest, not to erase it, but to breathe. Honoring is not stopping life. Honoring is continuing to live with meaning. I met a woman who spent years without moving a single thing. One day she told me something I will not forget. I feel like if I go on, I betray him. But what she was doing was betraying herself. Memory does not need daily sacrifices. It needs conscious presence. When you turn memory into an altar, you force yourself to live on your knees before the past. Ask yourself this honestly. If your partner could see you today, would they want to see you frozen or alive? Not perfect, not happy all the time. Alive, with order, with dignity, because true love does not confine you, it walks with you even when it is no longer there. This mistake rarely corrects itself, because standing still is easier than rebuilding, and when the present empties out, another immediate risk appears. Saying yes to any novelty, any promise, any relationship, just so you are not alone. That is where loneliness, when misunderstood, becomes dangerous, and that is something we need to talk about before it is too late. 8. Saying yes to new relationships, investments, or promises just to avoid being alone. Loneliness does not always scream. Sometimes it whispers. It sits beside you at night when the house has gone quiet and the day fades without witnesses. In that state, anything new looks like light. A person who appears suddenly. A proposal that promises company, money, projects, a future. And you, with emotional hunger still raw, say yes before asking too many questions. Not because you are naive, but because you do not want to feel alone again. I think about this carefully because old age makes you more vulnerable, not more foolish. The problem is not trusting. The problem is trusting quickly. When someone enters your life with urgency, intensity, and immediate solutions, they are almost never looking at your well-being, they are looking at their opportunity. Have you ever asked yourself why some people cannot tolerate slow time when they approach someone who has lost so much? I have seen relationships born from urgency and end in deep wear. I have seen investments presented as salvation turn into ruin. Promises wrapped in affection that hid dependency. There is not always bad intention, but there is always an imbalance. You are wounded. The other is not. And when one leans too quickly, they lose their center. Here the Stoics were clear. Everything new requires prudence. Not rejection, not closure, prudence. The practical tool at this point is simple and allows no exceptions. Time, verification, and boundaries. Enough time for emotion to settle, verification of facts, not words, and clear boundaries from the start. Anyone who gets offended because you move slowly is not protecting you. Anyone who rushes you almost never is. I remember a man who met someone just weeks after becoming a widower. Everything seemed like understanding, support, a shared future. In less than a year, he had changed his will, his home, and his routine. When he wanted to slow down, it was already too late. It was not love that moved him. It was fear of being alone. And fear is a poor advisor when mixed with affection. Ask yourself this before saying yes to something new. Whether this person or proposal will still be right for you in a year when you no longer need to be rescued, because what is born to cover a void rarely builds something solid. True companionship does not invade, it accompanies. It does not demand speed, it accepts process. This mistake is not noticed at first because it brings relief, but quick relief usually hides a high price, and when it adds up with all the previous ones, the final risk appears, the quietest of all. Not external, not social, not economic, abandoning yourself, believing that it is already too late to rebuild yourself. That is where everything else is decided, and that is what we need to look at now, without detours. 9. Abandoning yourself instead of rebuilding. This final mistake is rarely visible from the outside. It has no clear witnesses. It leaves no bills or documents behind. It happens inside. It is the moment when, after everything you have lived through, you start treating yourself as someone who is finished. You eat worse. You move less. You speak to yourself harshly. You postpone basic care, not because you do not know it matters, but because something in you starts to believe it is no longer worth it. I think about this slowly because there is no room for reproach here. The blow of losing the person you shared your life with is deep. It scrambles meaning, and in that disorder, a dangerous idea appears. It is too late for me. That phrase is not always said out loud, but it governs small decisions every day. Why take care of myself? Why put things in order? For whom? And so, without drama, you begin to disappear from your own life. I have seen this scene many times, an older adult who was strong, responsible, present, and who now lets themselves go, not out of laziness, but out of sadness. Routine dissolves. The body becomes clumsier than necessary. The mind loses sharpness, not because it cannot, but because no one calls on it, not even you. And when abandonment comes from oneself, it hurts more than any other. Here, Stoicism does not offer comfort, it offers structure. Viktor Frankl understood this with brutal clarity. Meaning is not awaited, it is built, even after an irreparable loss, even when there is no one left to please or to prove anything to. The practical tool at this point is to return to yourself with small but firm actions. Sleep better. Eat with order. Move your body every day, even when you do not feel like it. Keep schedules. Have responsibilities, even minimal ones. Not to feel good, but to avoid dissolving. I remember looking at myself in the mirror one day and not fully recognizing the man I saw. He was not defeated, he was neglected. And I understood something I was not taught when I was young. Self-respect does not depend on company. It depends on how you hold yourself together when no one is watching. Rebuilding yourself is not about becoming who you were before. It is about becoming someone worthy of what still remains to be lived. Ask yourself this with brutal honesty. If today you were the only person responsible for your well-being, what decision would you make this very afternoon? Not tomorrow, today, because no one is going to come rescue you from this point, and that is not a threat, it is a liberating truth. The power is still in your hands, even if they are tired. This mistake has no magical solution, it requires daily commitment. The blow was hard, yes, but it was not lethal. And this stage, even if it does not look like what you imagined, can still be the most sober, the most conscious, the most dignified of all. And now, with all of this on the table, it is time to close the circle, not to conclude it, but so you can carry it with you and begin to act from today. We have walked a difficult road together, not a comfortable one, but a necessary one. We talked about decisions made in shock, rushed signatures, assistance that takes away control, homes sold on impulse, rights given up out of guilt, practical disarray, isolation, memories turned into a prison, promises accepted out of fear of loneliness, and finally, that silent abandonment that begins when someone stops taking responsibility for themselves. Not to blame you, to give you clarity back. If there's one thing I want you to take with you today, it's this. The death of your partner does not take away responsibility for your life. It gives it back to you in full. Heavier, yes, lonelier too. But it is still yours. Dignity in old age is not about not suffering. It's about not disappearing, about holding yourself up when no one else can do it for you, about putting order in your inner and outer world so pain does not rule your decisions. My name is Gabriel, and this space is called the Stoic Garden. Here we don't talk to feel better for a moment. We talk to become stronger, steadier, more in command of ourselves. If this message helped you, share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe so we can keep walking together. And leave me a comment with the phrase, "I am Stoic," or "I am Stoic," along with the country you're listening from. I read every comment, and it matters to me to know from which part of the world this community of adults who refuse to give up is growing. Next, 2 videos will appear that can help you continue putting order into this stage of your life. Choose one, not out of curiosity, out of responsibility to yourself. We continue here, calmly, steadily, without disappearing.